Bleach doesn't actually smell clean. That's what nobody tells you. After enough years in a hospital, you stop smelling it as clean and start smelling it as cover. Something happened here. Something got on the floor. Something needed to be erased. Simard had learned that distinction somewhere between Kandahar and coming home. She worked the night shift at Hôpital du Sacré-Cœur in Montreal, the kind of shift that starts when the city is still pretending to wind down and ends when it's pretending to wake up. The ER at 3 in the morning is its own specific country with its specific rules. Simard knew them all. She'd been working this floor for 4 years, and in 4 years she had become part of the architecture. The overnight staff stopped seeing her, the same way you stop seeing a support beam. She was just there, dependable, structural, invisible. She preferred it that way. Her scrubs were dark green, always a size too large. She bought them deliberately big because the extra fabric hid the way she still held herself. Squared shoulders, weight distributed evenly on both feet, a stance that had nothing to do with nursing school, and everything to do with 8 months in a forward operating basin outside Panjwai. The posture had faded slightly over the years. The instinct hadn't. She was 36, though the shadows under her eyes made her look older, and she cultivated that too. Older women in hospitals got fewer questions. The triage desk was staffed by a junior nurse named Pelletier, not the Elise Pelletier in the file, but a different one, younger, a José Pelletier from Laval, who wore her dark hair in 2 braids and brought homemade muffins on Fridays and genuinely, sincerely loved every patient who came through the door. Simard found her exhausting in the particular way that people who haven't yet been broken find their way under your skin. Not dislike. Something more like grief. She remembered being that open. It was a Tuesday, late February, the kind of cold that doesn't just sit on your skin, but gets into the cartilage of your ears and the hinges of your jaw and stays there until May. Montreal cold was different from Alberta cold, which was different from the cold at 4,000 meters in a mountain valley that didn't appear on any map she'd ever been issued. But cold was cold. Simard had learned a long time ago not to complain about weather. There were worse things than cold. The waiting room held 6 people, an elderly man with a suspected UTI who kept falling asleep and startling himself awake, or a teenage girl with a sprained wrist being attended to by her extremely apologetic father. 2 women in their 50s who had arrived together and were now not speaking to each other, and a man in a down vest who had come in with chest pains and was currently texting with both thumbs in direct contradiction to his stated level of distress. Nothing loud, nothing that required Simard's pulse to do anything interesting. She was charting at the corner station, the one tucked behind the medication cabinet, where you could see the whole floor without being easily seen yourself. She had claimed it years ago without explanation, and nobody had ever challenged her for it. She sat slightly sideways, keyboard at an angle, so that her peripheral vision covered both the ambulance bay doors and the main entrance simultaneously. She would have told you it was habit. She would have been half lying. Simard, José Pelletier appeared at her elbow, holding a tablet. Bed 7 needs a reassessment. She's been waiting 2 hours, and I think her pain is actually a 7, not a 4. She told Traj it was a 4. She's being polite. She's 73, and she apologized to me for existing when I brought her a pillow. Simard looked up from the screen. Pelletier had that expression, the one that meant she had already decided what the right thing to do was and was technically asking permission out of institutional courtesy. Simard recognized the look. She had worn it herself once. Before she learned, that doing the right thing in the field and surviving the field were not always compatible objectives. "Go reassess her," Simard said. "Order a repeat set of vitals and tell Dr. Arcand to look at her when he's out of Bay 3. Pelletier nodded and squeaked away on her pristine white clogs. Simard returned to the screen. She clicked through the mandatory documentation fields with the mechanical fluency of someone who had long since stopped reading the words. The electronic health record system was the same particular shade of institutional boredom as every government interface she had ever encountered. From the Canadian Forces personnel database to the forms she had eventually, after 2 years of resistance, filled out in a Tim Hortons parking lot in Dorval. Click. Patient denies prior cardiac history. Click. Vitals within normal limits at admission. The ambulance bay doors blew open. Not the automatic hiss of a standard entry. The specific concussive bang of someone kicking them from outside because their hands were full. Simard's fingers left the keyboard before the sound finished registering. Not a flinch. A rage wrecked. Her body had learned the difference between civilian startle and threat assessment, and it made the calculation in the time it took most people to blink. 2 paramedics came through fast, pushing a gurney between them. The patient on it was a man in his 40s, gray-faced, hand pressed to his abdomen, wearing a jacket that had been cut open by shears. Behind them, another paramedic was reciting vitals from memory in rapid French. Abdominal stab wound, single entry point, lower right quadrant. Pressure's been dropping since pickup, 80/50 on the rig. He's compensating, but he's circling the drain. Allergies unknown, no ID on him. Dr. Arcand, who was 29 years old and had been a resident for 14 months and still flinched at arterial bleeds, came out of Bay 3 at a jog. He looked at the patient. He looked at the monitor readout. He looked at Simard the way junior residents always looked at Simard when things went sideways. Not quite asking for help, but leaving the door open. "He needs a large-bore peripheral 2 lines, Simard said, already moving. "Antecubital's going to be collapsed. Don't waste time on it." "I was going to try the—" "You can try it," Simard said, "or you can watch." She pulled gloves on in transit, 2 quick snaps, and reached the gurney as it was locking into bay position. The patient's veins were flat, his skin cold and clammy to the touch, perfusion already shunting to protect his core. A textbook-compensated shock presentation. Simard had seen it enough times to recognize it the way you recognize a face, not as a checklist of features but as a whole thing. She found the external jugular with her thumb. The vein was still there, a faint cord-like line under the jaw, doing its best under impossible circumstances. She respected it for that. 18 gauge, she said, and someone put it in her hand, and she placed it without ceremony, first attempt, 1 fluid motion, a flash of dark blood. "He's in," she said. "Hang o' neg, run it wide open. Someone call the OR and tell them we're coming up." Dr. Arcand was good, she would give him that. 14 months in, and he had learned when to lead and when to follow. And the doctors who learned that early tended to survive this job. He got on the phone. The team moved. The blood pressure began its slow, grudging recovery. Simard stepped back. She didn't linger. She didn't need the validation of watching her intervention succeed. She had stopped needing that somewhere around the 5th month in Panjwai, when there was no one to tell you that you'd done well, when the doing well was just the baseline requirement for the person beside you to keep breathing. She stripped her gloves and dropped them in the bin and walked back to the corner station. Dr. Arcand appeared. 15 minutes later, the patient stabilized and en route to surgery and leaned against the medication cabinet with the particular posture of someone who wanted to say something and was assembling the nerve. "That jugular stick," he said. "That's not standard." "No," Simard agreed. "Where did you learn it?" She looked at the monitor readings on her screen. "Continuing education," she said. He waited, clearly hoping for more. She didn't offer it. Eventually, he pushed off the cabinet and went back to his bay, and Simard returned to clicking through her documentation, and the night resumed its usual texture of low-grade exhaustion and managed chaos. By 5:30, the ER had the particular depleted quality of a long-haul flight in its final hour. The garbage cans were full. The floor by the ambulance bay had a dried streak of something that the cleaning staff hadn't gotten to yet. The fluorescent lights were doing the thing they always did past 5 a.m., vibrating at a frequency just below conscious hearing, but just above comfortable ignorance. Simard had long since made her peace with it. She had slept in places where the ambient noise was actual artillery. A hospital hum was nothing. Burnt. She was 20 minutes from the end of her shift. She was thinking about her car, a 10-year-old Civic with a heater that worked intermittently and a passenger seat perpetually occupied by 3 months of unopened mail. She was thinking about the specific glass of scotch she was going to pour when she got home. Not a large one, just enough to sand the edges down. And the particular quality of silence in her apartment at 6:30 in the morning, when the building was still quiet and the light through the east window was that thin, fragile gray that didn't demand anything from you yet. She was not thinking about the past. She almost never thought about the past before 7 a.m. She had rules. The main entrance doors opened. Simard heard the footsteps before she consciously registered that anything was wrong. It wasn't a single sound. It was a pattern. 3 sets of footfalls. Moving in a configuration she recognized not from nursing school, but from every patrol she had ever walked in body armor through territory that was trying to kill her. The spacing was wrong for civilians. Civilians cluster or scatter. They don't distribute themselves across a threshold with unconscious tactical geometry. She did not move. She shifted her weight a 1/4 inch and adjusted her angle to the screen. And now she could see the main doors in her peripheral vision without appearing to look. 3 people had come in, 2 men, 1 woman. They were dressed in civilian clothes, dark parkas, heavy boots, the practical layering of people who spent real time outdoors in Canadian winters, rather than people who spent Canadian winters going between heated cars and heated offices. They wore the clothes the way soldiers wear civilian clothes, which is to say slightly, incorrectly, as if the clothes were a costume that fit well but wasn't quite home. The taller of the 2 men had a jaw like a structural element and a way of standing that distributed his weight forward, ready. The woman was shorter, mid-40s, close-cropped graying hair, a scar along her left forearm that was partially visible when her sleeve rode up as she reached toward the triage glass. Her eyes, Simard registered this from 15 meters away without seeming to look, moved the same way Simard's moved, scanning, cataloging, eliminating. The second man was in a wheelchair pushed by the first. He was younger than the others, late 20s maybe, broad-shouldered, and he held himself with the specific upright dignity of someone who has had to relearn what upright means. His left leg was a prosthetic, the kind that had been designed to look functional rather than decorative. A working leg, not a display piece. Simard's stomach dropped. Not fear, something older than fear, recognition. She watched them approach the triage desk. José Pelletier looked up with the open, professional warmth of someone who had not yet learned to read rooms the way these rooms sometimes needed to be read. Bonsoir. Can I help you? Pelletier said, defaulting to French and then immediately correcting. I mean, good evening. Are you here for a patient? We're looking for a nurse, the woman said. Her English had that specific flat precision of someone who had done her schooling in both languages and defaulted to neither when she was focused. Night shift. She would have been here since 7 p.m. We have a number of nurses on tonight, Pelletier said, with the careful neutrality of triage staff who were trained not to confirm or deny staffing to unidentified visitors. Her name is Simard, the tall man said. Pelletier's face shifted slightly. She started to turn toward the corner station. Simard closed her eyes for 1 second. Then she stood up. She came around the medication cabinet slowly, without hurry, because hurry would have looked like something, and she refused to look like something. She kept her expression at its usual register. Flat, slightly tired, the face of a woman who was 20 minutes from the end of a long shift and had no particular feelings about anything. The three of them turned when they heard her clogs. The woman with the short gray hair went still in the specific way that only people who have trained their bodies to not react go still. The tall man exhaled once through his nose. The younger man in the wheelchair gripped the armrest with one hand and then deliberately released it. They looked at her the way people look at something they weren't sure they were ever going to see again. Simard stopped 5 feet away. She crossed her arms over her chest. You have the wrong person, she said. Her voice was level and dry, and she meant every word of it in multiple senses. Corporal Simard, the woman said quietly. Not a question. That person retired, Simard said. 4 years ago. Can I ask how you got this address? VAC records, the tall man said. Employment information is redacted. Neighborhood was enough. He paused. We're sorry to come here. We wouldn't have if there was another way. There's always another way, Simard said. The other way is not coming. The young man in the wheelchair spoke for the first time. His voice was lower than she expected, and careful, the voice of someone who had learned to measure what he said. We know you don't want this. We know you made it clear. But we couldn't. He stopped, tried again. We needed you to know that Thibault made it. Simard's arms tightened across her chest. Thibault, she said. He was evac'd out of the valley 12 hours after you. The report said he didn't have 12 hours. He had more because of what you did. The young man, she was looking at him now, really looking, and the features assembled themselves into something she recognized around the eyes, around the set of the jaw. He's in Chicoutimi. He has 2 kids. He wanted to come himself, but his wife is 8 months pregnant, and we told him to stay home. The woman with the short gray hair took a step forward. Her name, Simard would learn later, was Busha, and she had been a signals officer in the same rotation, a name and a voice on a radio during 17 of the worst hours of Simard's life. They had never actually been in the same room before tonight. We're not here to make you relive it, Boucher said. We know what you said to the unit liaison when he called in 2021. We know you meant it. We're here because LeBlanc, she nodded toward the young man in the wheelchair, has been doing the reconstruction, the official report. He needed to know what actually happened at Grid Point November 7. Simard looked at the young man. LeBlanc, she said. He nodded. Private LeBlanc. I was the one they pulled out of the culvert. She stared at him. The culvert. The drainage ditch at the northeast edge of the compound, half collapsed. She remembered the sound of the mortar round that brought down the concrete. She remembered the dust. She remembered finding LeBlanc by the sound of his breathing, not by sight, because there was no light and the smoke was absolute. You weren't breathing when I found you, she said. Her voice had gone somewhere different. She couldn't quite bring it back. I know, he said. I wasn't. And then I was. Quote. Pelletier, behind the triage desk, had gone perfectly still. She was young, and she was open, and she understood enough French to have caught the word culvert and the word mortar, and she was putting things together in real time, her face doing the work her professional training was trying to stop it from doing. Dr. Arcand had come out of Bay 1 and was standing in the hallway with a chart he was no longer reading. The ER had gone that specific kind of quiet that emergency rooms go sometimes. Not the quiet of nothing happening, but the quiet of everyone in the room deciding not to be the thing that breaks something. I didn't save everyone, Simard said. The words came out rough, the way words come out when they've been stored somewhere too long without air. I need you to understand that. Before you came here with whatever this is, I need you to understand that I didn't save everyone. We know, the tall man said. Duplessis, she said. Yes. And Carrier. Yes. She put the names in the room and didn't take them back. Duplessis, who had been 22 years old, and from Rivière-du-Loup, and who had told her 2 days before November 7 that he was going to open a restaurant when he got home. He'd already picked the name. He'd been thinking about the menu for months. Courier, who she had held with both hands for 19 minutes in the dark and the dust, while the compound fell down around them and the radio stayed silent, willing the blood to stay in the body by the force of something that was not medicine and was not prayer but was somewhere between the two. I lost them, Simard said. Her voice was not shaking. She refused to let it shake in this fluorescent room, with these strangers watching. I lost them and I came home and I put on green scrubs and I got a job where the blood is mostly from car accidents and kitchen knives, and nobody is trying to kill me in between patients, and that is what I need it to be. Boucher didn't flinch. We know what you need it to be, she said. We're not asking you to change that. Then what are you asking? LeBlanc reached into the front pocket of his parka. He pulled out something small. He held it out to her across the distance between them, resting it on his palm. It was a military identification tag. Not his, not hers. The chain was broken and the metal was scratched, and there was a dark stain across the face of it that had never fully cleaned out of the stamped lettering. This is Duplessis, LeBlanc said. It was found at November 7 during the reconstruction survey last year. The official report has it logged as recovered material. But it was in your sector, and we thought. He stopped. We thought it should be with someone who remembers him, not in a box in an archive. Simard stared at the tag. The ear hummed around her. The lights vibrated at their low, persistent frequency. Somewhere behind her, a monitor beeped in regular commentary on some patient's continued existence. He wanted a restaurant, she said. He had a name for it picked out. Chez Rosaire, LeBlanc said quietly. He told everyone who would listen. Simard uncrossed her arms. Her hands were not entirely steady, and she had accepted years ago that there were some things the hands held on to regardless of what the mind decided. She reached out and took the tag. The metal was cold from outside. The broken chain curled against her palm. The embossed letters of Duplessis' name pressed against the pad of her thumb. She closed her fingers around it. Behind her, she heard Pelletier breathe out very carefully, trying not to make a sound. Thibault has 2 kids, Simard said. A girl, 4, and a boy who is about to be born, LeBlanc said. She nodded. She looked at Boucher. The reconstruction report. It'll have the November 7 timeline. Complete. It goes to the review board in April. Make sure Duplessis and Carrier are named specifically, not as casualties, as people who were doing their jobs when the support failed. She said it without inflection, the way she might dictate a medication order, but her hand was closed around the identification tag and wasn't opening. They will be, Boucher said. The tall man, whose name was Gauthier, she would piece together later from the way the others deferred to him. A sergeant at some point, the way he waited before speaking, cleared his throat gently. "We're going to go," he said. "We didn't come to take up your night. We just needed you to know about Thibault, and to give you that." "You drove from Ottawa," he said. "It's not far." "It was 4.5 hours. She didn't say that." LeBlanc moved to go. Then he stopped and looked back at her, and there was something in his face that she recognized because she wore it herself sometimes. The particular expression of someone who has survived something that didn't ask their permission first. "I have nightmares about the culvert," he said. "I wake up and I can't breathe, and I have to sit at the kitchen table for an hour before I'm okay." He paused. "My wife says I talk in my sleep. She says I keep saying the same word." Another pause. "Simard, just the name, over and over." She didn't know what to do with that, so she didn't do anything with it. She just nodded. They left. The three of them moved back across the waiting room. Gauthier and Boucher on either side of LeBlanc's chair. Gauthier pushing, and the automatic doors opened and took them, and the cold February air came in briefly, and then the doors sealed behind them and they were gone. The ER remained suspended for a moment. Then the elderly man with the suspected UTI startled himself awake and looked around in brief alarm before closing his eyes again. The monitor in Bay 2 resumed its commentary. Dr. Arcand went back into his bay. The building breathed. Pelletier appeared at Simard's side. She was not technically crying. Her eyes were very bright and her jaw was set, and she was clearly working hard on the not crying as an active project. "Were you?" she started. "Yes," Simard said. She didn't make her say the rest of it. "I didn't know." "You weren't supposed to." Pelletier looked at her with the open, earnest quality that Simard had been finding exhausting for 4 years. Tonight it didn't exhaust her. Tonight it was just a face. A young face that hadn't been to the places that Simard had been, and with any luck wouldn't have to go, and there was something in that. Something that wasn't comfort exactly, but was in the same general neighborhood. "Is there anything?" "I have 20 minutes left on my shift," Simard said. "Bed 4 needs discharge paperwork. The woman in bed 7 needs her pain reassessed again in 45 minutes, and someone needs to clean up that streak by the ambulance bay before the day shift comes in and slips on it." Pelletier nodded professionally. "Oh," Simard said, not unkindly. And Pelletier went. Simard walked back to the corner station. She sat down in her rolling chair, which creaked in the same spot it always creaked. She set the identification tag on the desk beside the keyboard. It sat there under the fluorescent light, ordinary and terrible and small. She pulled the keyboard toward her. Click, patient resting comfortably. Click, vitals stable at discharge. She finished the paperwork. She didn't stop to think about what she was feeling, because in her experience feelings didn't benefit from supervision. They were better left to move at their own pace, in their own direction, without someone standing over them, demanding they arrive somewhere in particular. At 7 a.m., the day shift came through the doors in the usual burst of cold air and loud voices and coffee cups, and the specific morning person energy that Simard found alienating and faintly heroic in equal measure. She stood up, she put on her coat, she clocked out. She walked to her car. The Civic's heater took 4 minutes to produce anything that could generously be called warmth. She sat in the parking lot while it struggled, watching the February light come up over the hospital roof, flat and pale, and without opinion, the kind of light that didn't ask anything of you. Montreal in late February looked like the world mid-thought, not ready to commit to spring, not ready to let go of winter either. She reached into her coat pocket. Her fingers found the identification tag and she took it out. In the gray morning light, it looked different than it had under the fluorescent lamps. Just metal, just a name. The dark stain in the letters was the color of old rust. Duplessis had wanted a restaurant. He had picked a name. He had been thinking about the menu. LeBlanc was sitting at a kitchen table in Ottawa right now, maybe, drinking coffee and being ordinary, being alive in the way people are alive when someone made sure they stayed that way. Thibault was in Chicoutimi with a 4-year-old daughter and a son who was about to arrive into a world that Thibault was still in. Simard set the tag on the dashboard, in the center where she could see it. She had not saved everyone. She would never be done not having saved everyone. That was the accounting you carried when you did this work, in the field, in the ER, in all the places where the distance between here and gone was something you were responsible for navigating without instruments, in the dark, under fire, with whatever happened to be in your hands. But LeBlanc was in Ottawa, Thibault was in Chicoutimi. She put the car in reverse. The heater finally found its rhythm, pushing something that actually approximated warmth through the vents. The wipers cleared the thin rime of condensation off the windshield in 2 slow passes, and then the world was visible again. The gray parking lot, the gray sky, the ordinary morning. She drove out onto the street. The tag caught the pale light on the dashboard as she turned, flashing once, and she let it sit there where she could see it, a small, cold piece of metal with a name on it, riding home with her through the waking city. I keep thinking about the identification tag sitting on a dashboard in the gray February light. That image stays with me, not the dramatic moment in the ER, not the soldiers walking in, but the quiet after. Simard alone in a cold car with a piece of metal that holds a whole person's name. What strikes me most about her story is how much she carried by herself, for so long, without asking anything of anyone. That's not just stoicism. That's a particular kind of moral weight. The kind you take on when you've decided that your own grief doesn't get to matter as much as your function. She kept showing up to the night shift. She kept doing the hard work with precision and without complaint. She saved a man's life with a needle in a jugular, and then walked back to her corner and poured cold coffee, and nobody around her had any idea what those hands had already been through. There's something in that I find genuinely humbling. The intelligence it takes to be that good at 2 completely different kinds of medicine, field trauma and emergency nursing, requires years of rigorous, unglamorous study. It requires the discipline to stay sharp, even when you're exhausted, even when the lights are humming, and the shift won't end and you'd rather be anywhere else. Simard didn't become that capable by accident. She built it, deliberately, the way you build anything that actually holds weight. But what I keep coming back to is the moment she names Duplessis and Carrier out loud. In the middle of a hospital's, surrounded by people who don't know what those names mean, she puts them in the room anyway. She refuses to let the visit be only about the ones who survived. That's the part of her I think matters most, not the technical skill, not the toughness, but the refusal to let accountability disappear just because it's painful. She could have accepted the thanks and stayed quiet. Instead, she said, "I lost them," right out loud. That's not self-punishment. It's integrity. The real kind, not the kind that looks good, the kind that costs you something. And then there's LeBlanc, who drove 4.5 hours from Ottawa in February to give a dead man's identification tag to the person who remembered him best. That act required its own kind of courage, to go looking for someone who said they didn't want to be found, to deliver something that wasn't going to make anyone feel better exactly, but that needed a home. He didn't do it because it was easy. He did it because it was right, and because he had worked hard enough on his own recovery to have the steadiness to offer something to someone else. What I take from this story is that resilience isn't about not breaking. It's about what you do with the pieces once you've collected them. Simard didn't come home whole. She came home functional. And that was enough, and she built a life inside that limitation with discipline and quiet honesty. The soldiers didn't come back to fix her. They came back because they finally had enough of themselves together to offer her something real. The tag on the dashboard doesn't erase anything. Duplessis still doesn't get his restaurant. Carrier is still gone. But LeBlanc is in Ottawa. Thibault is in Chicoutimi waiting for his son to arrive. And Simard is driving through a waking city with something on her dashboard that used to be only a wound, and is now, maybe, also a witness. That feels like the truest kind of forward motion I know.